Well, let's get to the position where it all starts on offense, and that is the quarterback. You lose Zion Webb to graduation, but return Logan Smothers and Jashawn Smoot from last year. They played multiple quarterbacks last year, often rotating in games. This year, they also bring in Tyler Huff from Furman, Griffin Brewster from Kent State, and Zion Turner from Connecticut. How did the quarterback room look in the spring, and what do you expect this quarterback situation look like come fall?
Yeah, it's an interesting situation. I mean, someone named Zion Webb is in the quarterback room for the first time in like 20 years. He had 7 years at Jacksonville State, so it's a little different. But I think right now, Logan was kind of still recovering from an arm injury that he had, and it's just kind of been lingering. So he's looked a lot better. But on that same note, I mean, I'm not too critical of a person because I could never play quarterback or, get hit by a linebacker, but all the quarterbacks look pretty dang good. I mean, Griffin was kind of a little bit of a surprise, came from Kent State. He was a walk-on, so he wasn't really on the roster. So we kind of discovered him, quote unquote, about 3 weeks into spring, but he did enough to make me ask, who is this guy? He looks really good. But I mean, I think Zion Turner as well just kind of fits the mold of what, Rich Rod's going after, kind of can really get in the pocket and stay in there really well, get away when he has to, but it can also throw the ball really well. I mean, his freshman year, he did the not impossible, but he led UConn to a bowl game as a freshman, which is pretty impressive, considering that it's not just it's UConn, but he was a freshman, he was new to the system. Obviously, Huff is someone we haven't seen yet, but I mean, whenever Jacksonville State was scouting South Carolina for their South Carolina matchup, they watched the Furman game. And that's kind of when Rich Rod saw Tyler Huff and said, this guy is pretty good. So, and with all these quarterbacks coming in as well, I mean, if you're Tyler Huff and you want a shot to play at the next level, you're not going to go somewhere where you're not going to play. So and Rich Rod, he says, to try and quote him the best I can, he said, I get 20 quarterbacks in the room so that when one sucks, I can put the other one in. Then when that one sucks, I put the other one in until it works out. So, all these guys are going to get playing time, and all these guys have looked pretty solid. There's a couple behind him. I mean, you mentioned Tayshawn, who was kind of expected to be the guy behind Zion, and then all these other transfers came in. And Caden Creel's a local guy. Well, local. He's from Alabama, but from Fairhope, which is kind of down south. But all those guys have looked pretty good. I don't think it's a too much of a wide open competition as many people think. I think right now it's Logan's job to lose just because he's had experience in that system and he's kind of been handed, all the snaps that Zion hasn't taken at this point. But if something were to happen, I think that any of the other guys are really more than capable of stepping up.
Moving on to the running game, this group lost a fair amount of production, but it could have been a lot worse. If we would have talked, I don't know, 3 weeks ago, they lost their leading rusher in 2023 in Malik Jackson to graduation, along with Reggion Bennett and Jawan Evans to the portal. But they do bring back Ron Wiggins, Anwar Lewis, and Ty Waymon. How did this backfield look in the spring?
Yeah, we were talking about this a little bit before. We were planning to record a few weeks ago, and then it didn't work out. And then in that period, like a bunch of guys transferred into Jacksonville State. So the room, looks way different than it did like a month ago. At the spring game, it was pretty much Anwar Lewis, and they used another guy, or it was Ty, and then they used a guy who plays wide receiver to kind of fill in that role just for the spring game. And Anwar didn't play too much. I think he was battling some kind of soreness. So Richard was obviously like, I'm not going to talk about the running back room right now just because there's nothing to talk about. But, they've added a bunch. You mentioned Ron Wiggins coming back is just such a key piece. I mean, he was there for he was probably there for half of spring, if not more from what I can remember. But, he was kind of expected to be the guy, and he really showed that off. He's, he looks a little bigger, but when you're playing in Rich Rod's system, you can't, he's not going for, bruisers. He's going for, people who are quick and fast. And that's kind of what Ron looked like. I think that he's taken that step. He's, he looks a lot better than he did from the end of last season as opposed to the beginning of, spring. And he didn't really have a reason to, have to get better. But I mean, I think that he looked really good in camp. And Anwar has been a guy who's, he was kind of part of that three-headed monster last year. Losing Malik is going to be kind of a tough blow, but they have obviously replacements. They're adding Andrew Paul from Georgia. They have Michelle Dukes from South Florida, and I think he played at Clemson too. Then they have a really good freshman class as well. Justice Savage, Christian Lando, and Jaden Thomas are a few guys that came in from that freshman class, and they're just like I think that they're set. I mean, I thought that they were going to have to rely a lot on these freshmen to kind of pick up what was left. But all these transfers, especially, guys like Andrew and Michelle, these guys look more than capable. And especially when you're adding Ron Wiggins back to that mix, I think that they might even be better this year as far as just pure depth as they were last year.
What were your thoughts when you heard that Andrew Paul was coming into this running back room that already had, like you kind of mentioned, it kind of had everybody because Ron Wiggins, I think, committed back to Jacksonville State maybe a few days prior to that.
Excuse me. Yeah, I don't know the timeline. My memory's terrible, so I don't remember the timeline too well. But it's a little bit surprising for me. I mean, if you're a guy like Andrew and you have the talent, I wouldn't be too surprised if you wanted to go be a star somewhere else. I obviously don't know the nature of his injury. I don't know if that's something that's going to linger for a while, but I mean, he has the talent and he showed it at, in whether it was those minimal carries he got last season, whether it was, a couple of plays from Georgia's G-Day game, he looked like he has the talent. But obviously when you're at Georgia and they have a lot of good freshmen coming in, especially running back, I mean, he's kind of going to get buried there. But I'm a little bit surprised he wouldn't want to be a star somewhere else. But if he wants carries, I mean, that's where he's going to get him as Jacksonville State, because they use every single running back that they have in that room one way or another.
Well, the quarterbacks certainly get their share of carries in this offense, but how do you think the carries shake out in that room there for 2024 and the running backs?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. I mean, last year it was no running backs started every game. It was Malik Jackson, most of the time, and then Ron got the start at some point, and then Anwar got the start at some point. And the way that Rich Rod runs his offense is, it's tough to say, but running backs are going to get hurt. Just the nature of them playing so fast, just the way they have to get up and they have to set back in, and then they have to, get the ball off in like 6 seconds or less. It's just the nature of the game as well, but especially in Rich Rod's system where they're moving so fast, there's just some things you can't control. So one way or another, these guys are going to get carries. But if it were, just from what I know and what I think personally, I could see Ron really carrying that backfield. I mean, obviously he had an incredible game in the New Orleans Bowl. He really recovered quickly from injury. We thought that, and we were told after the Coastal Carolina game at week 3 or 4, he was out for the season. And then with a chest injury, then he just surprises everyone and comes back for the midweek game against FIU. And from there, he looked really good. So I could see Ron really shaking up to get a lot of those carries. Anwar is more than capable. And I don't know much about these freshmen and transfers, but Andrew Paul is a guy that obviously is more than capable. And I mean, Justice Savage, the freshman as well, he's guy that just looks really good, really ready. He was previously committed to Indiana and flipped to Jacksonville State. So a really interesting pick for Jacksonville State, and something that wouldn't have happened, a few seasons ago. So to tell you the truth, it's a big question mark that'll have to be answered in preseason camp, but it's nothing but positive for Jacksonville State's running back room.
Moving over to the receivers in the passing game, they do take a hit at the wide receiver position. They lose their top 2 pass catchers from 2023 and Perry Carter and Quentin Lane to graduation. But not all is lost, as Michael Petway and P.J. Wells return to the fold in 2024. And then they bring in some folks from the transfer portal, Brandon Spector from Clemson, DeMarcus Lacey from North Alabama, and Samaria Rudolph from UAB. How did the wide receivers look in the spring?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough losing Perry and guys like that, Quentin as well. But those guys, PJ's been a guy who's led the offense. I think that he led the team in receiving yards in the COVID spring season, I think is what it was. But he's more than capable, and he really showed flashes of him being able to perform, especially after battling an injury. It was tough for him because it was kind of it seemed like they had gotten used to this thing, and he was just kind of getting back introduced to it as well. I think that you mentioned DeMarcus Lacey. He's a guy that can play pretty much anywhere. I think that he played some running back at his former stop, but he's a guy that's going to be really versatile. And kind of circling back to the running backs, I mean, Ron's a guy that caught passes, more and more as the season went on, and especially last spring, I was a little surprised to see, oh, he's catching passes. I had never really seen that from him, but wasn't really surprised. Anwar's a guy who can also catch some passes. And I don't know much about these other transfer running backs, but that's kind of something that they turned to as well, was running backs can get, 4 catches a game. Michael's Petway is obviously, a guy that's been in the system a while. I think that he's on his 5th year of college football, despite being a redshirt junior. He might even get one more. It's weird that, Jacksonville State has like 5 or 6 guys in the last few years that have played college football 10 years, but I guess that's how it's shaken out. But he's one of those guys, veteran leader. But to tell you the truth, I mean, it's going to be a lot of question marks. I think that there's a few freshmen as well that'll have to get some catches in as well. But it's a lot. There's just going to be a lot of question marks with that wide receiver room. I know we're going to talk about it in a second, but Jacksonville State's tight ends are also going to, expected to be a big part of that wide receiver group. It's going to be, not lacking anything, but I think that it's going to be interesting to see who steps up into those roles that are needed over there.
So do you think Wells is kind of the wide receiver one for the offense in 2024?
It's tough to say. I mean, I think that it shook out, and it was rightfully so that Perry was the wide receiver one, quote unquote, last year, but it's never really, I don't think that in Rich Rod's eyes it's wide receiver one or wide receiver two. It's just
They spread it
who
around.
they're playing. They just share them around so much. It's never really hard to tell. I mean, if every single receiver on Jacksonville State's roster finished with exactly 300 yards, I wouldn't be too surprised at that, just because of how much they use every single player on their roster.
What so week one, if you have to predict who the starters are at wide receiver, who do you think they are?
It's tough. I mean, still right now there's a few question marks. I know PJ is one of them. I hated to not answer your question, but PJ is definitely one of them. He's a guy who's been in the system for a while, as I mentioned, and just really tall, really, physical guy. I could see Michael Petway being, I think that he would be one of the guys that would be a candidate to step up as well. I say step up, but he's been in the system a while. But he's kind of seen spurts on and off and on and off. But I think that especially this year, he could see a lot of consistency come his way, especially as a leader. And then kind of in that third spot, it was kind of rotated between a lot last year. I mean, Quentin Lane was kind of put in that position last year, really stepped up really well. There were a lot of other guys who were kind of rotating in and out, kind of all year. So, I mean, you could pretty much just pick a card out of a hat for any of the other guys. And I'd say, yeah, sure, go for it.
All right, this next question, we weren't exactly sure where to put this question with the position group, because it seemed like this guy was all over the field in the spring. But what can you tell us about Carter Lambert and how he will be used and what his role in the offense will be?
It's funny. He's the first time that he caught my attention, and I was like, what is going on, is I saw number 6 fielding punts. I think 2 springs ago. I was like, what is going on? So I, asked Rich Rod about it. He said that, oh yeah, that dude's the fastest guy on our team. I think he ran close to a 4.40. He's just a fast guy. I mean, I think that he won, it was either the 800 meter or the hurdles in the Alabama High School Athletic Association state meet. He's just a quick guy. I mean, he's pretty much played everywhere, as you can imagine. I mean, I think that he's a go-getter enough to even play tight end. He can run the ball. He can pass the ball. He can do pretty much anything. It's funny. He's told us before, I know that, I'm just a good athlete. And he had to work real hard for it, because he said, and I quote, I was a scrawny little kid. And so he's had to work really hard for it. And it's cool to see him kind of take on this gadget role. I don't know how, what truly they think is his prime, spot. He's been working a lot on routes. He said that was his toughest thing, but it's going to be interesting to see what happens with him. I really don't know where to put that question either, but he can pretty much do it all for Jacksonville State.
Would you
it's pretty cool.
compare it to kind of like a Taysom Hill for the Saints? Maybe I don't know.
So. I think so. I mean, I don't think that he'll get too many looks at quarterback, but I could anywhere else. Sure, why not? He's game for it, and I'm game for it happening for him.
The tight end position gets a fair amount of run in this offense. Returning starter Sean Brown was targeted on roughly 19% of the routes that he ran in 2023. He was the third leading receiver for the Gamecocks last year. Can we expect the same for him in 2024?
I think so. I mean, he's been so valuable to this offense one way or another. As far as in the Middle Tennessee State game, he had just a phenomenal game, and I think he was whatever the tight end of the week is nationally. Really good game that weekend, but he's just so valuable in the run game as well as so many of these receivers and other position players are. He's just so valuable in the way that he can run routes and block, and the runway that he can just get off and catch passes as well. He's just so valuable to the team, but that doesn't really do him justice. I think that he's honestly a Sunday type of guy. He's probably one of the best pure athletes that Jacksonville State has. And Jacksonville State has a pretty good reputation of getting tight ends out, which is kind of interesting to me, but he's one of them for sure. There's a few other guys. Jacob Barrick's one of them who never really caught too many passes, but he was just so valuable in the blocking game that they really had a great 1-2 punch. I think that kind of was highlighted in the South Carolina game, just the 1-2 punch of, he catches the passes, I do the blocking, but I can also catch the passes and I can also do some blocking. They're a really good duo. There's a couple of more. I think Alex Wood is his name, is one of them from Huntsville. They're really looking to add size in that tight end room. I think he's like 6'4", 6'5", or something like that. So he's a pretty big dude. And then we were talking about Carter Lambert, but there's a guy, he played quarterback in high school, Pearson Baldwin, and he's played some really valuable snaps for Jacksonville State on special teams. And he looked pretty good in spring, especially at a time when I think 2 springs ago when Sean Brown and Jacob were both injured and he had to kind of fill in at those reps with the ones. They have depth there. It might be one of their deepest positions at this point, but I could see a lot of targets still going the tight end's way for sure.
Speaking of blocking, so critical in this Rich Rod offense. So the offensive line does bring back 3 of the 5 starters from last year. How did that group look in the spring?
They've looked good. I mean, it's going to be tough to replace a guy like Traylon, who's been in the system for so long, and Xavier Bosley is, as I mentioned previously, he might be a Sunday type guy, especially once he gets in that West Virginia, that system. But a guy like Cam Jones, who is just massive. Rich Rod says that he started out as a quarterback, I think. And then Rich Rod says, and I quote, he ate his way to being a tight end, and then he ate his way to being an offensive lineman. I mean, this dude's just massive. And he's really what Jacksonville State needed on the offensive line because they were kind of not undersized, but Rich Rod always says, we got to get bigger. We got to get bigger. So that was something that was really positive for Jacksonville State. Kind of in that 5th spot, it's going to be tough to kind of gauge that because they have so many freshmen that are coming in, and Rich Rod's not afraid to start freshmen, and they have some transfers that are coming in as well. It was kind of rotated in and out, I think, for a little while of spring. I'm not really remembering too well, but, I could see a few guys who were freshmen last year who kind of, started at some points in the season, kind of scoop into that new role. But it'll be interesting to see, especially with some of the new guys that are coming in, because Rich Rod really preaches, size is so important to us. So I wouldn't be surprised to see some of those bigger freshmen. I know a couple played on state championship participating teams, so they have experience playing against the guys who are really good. So I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see who gets that 5th spot, but Cam Jones has looked really good. Obviously, Clay Webb was an All-American last year. And then, they have a couple of other guys, Brock Roby and Osteen, who are coming back. So they have experience. It's going to be interesting to see who fills in that 5th hole.
If you had to pick an offensive player to have a breakout type season in 2024, who would that be?
It's going to be it's going to be a weird pick for me, but this guy, Jordan McCants, on wide receiver, I think that you should know him or should know him by the end of the season. He's been, kind of developing. I think he had 1 catch last year, but if that says anything about this poll, but he's looked really good. I think he's improved every single time I've seen him. He's really caught my eye. But if we're talking about, a guy who was pretty good last year and could take that step this year, I mean, I think that it's tough because Ron got so many looks and then Malik got, most of the carries. But I still think Anwar is a guy who can make a difference on this Jacksonville State team. I think that he got plagued with injuries for a little while. He's still kind of overcame those injuries in spring, but I think that if he can stay healthy and get healthy, he'll be a big difference maker for Jacksonville State. But if you're going for like this rare poll, I'm going with the guy Jordan McCants. I think that people might know him by the end of the season for sure.